Hello, welcome everybody. I see people trickling in. Thank you so much for joining us. Yep, folks are starting to trickle in from the waiting room, so let's give them just a couple of seconds and we will get started. All right, thanks to everybody for joining us. My name is Alberto Medina. I'm the president of Boricuas Unidos en la Diaspora. It's a pleasure to be here with some of my friends and colleagues for this great conversation on how the U.S. elections, Donald Trump, colonialism, all of these things threaten Puerto Ricans on the island and in the diaspora. This is part of our education and engagement series that we are doing in partnership with Diaspórica, El podcast, hosted by my colleague Merari, who will be moderating this conversation. So thanks to everyone again for joining us. Merari is going to take it from here, ask some questions. We're going to have time for questions from the audience at the end of the event. So as you listen, go to the Q&A feature in your Zoom, submit your questions. We're only going to take questions in writing for this one, so we'll be looking at the questions you submit, and Merari will ask them of our panelists. So keep that in mind. Keep your questions in mind as you hear the conversation. And without further ado, I'll leave you with my friend and colleague Merari Fernandez. Take it away.
Hola, I want to welcome everyone to this webinar and those who will be listening through Diaspórica, el podcast, a podcast that aims to become a bridge and provide a political voice to the Puerto Rican diaspora. To stay connected with Diaspórica, you can go to our website, diasporica.caprani.fm. Follow us on social media, on Twitter at PR_Diaspórica, or find us on Facebook. We're also on Stitcher, Amazon Music, Pandora, and Apple Podcasts. In today's episode, we want to talk about the impacts a potential Trump presidency could have on Puerto Ricans living in Puerto Rico and in the diaspora, and Puerto Ricans not living in Puerto Rico. And for that, we will have two women who are active in the Puerto Rican diaspora and who understand the way U.S. politics works and the impacts it will have in terms of decision-making in the lives of the Puerto Rican people. So first of all, we have Mayra Rivera Vázquez. Welcome, Mayra.
Hola, buenas noches. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mayra, for being here. Mayra Rivera Vázquez lives in South Carolina. Currently, she's a member of the South Carolina Democratic Party. She served as the first Latina county chair and is the first Latina party officer and second vice chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party. In the past, she worked as an advisor to the Senate of Puerto Rico and as the Secretary of the Economic Development and Community Organizations. And we also have Daniela Velázquez. Welcome, Daniela. Hi. Daniela Velázquez is an Alderwoman representing the 6th Ward of San Luis. She's the first generation daughter of Puerto Rican migrants to the U.S. She has worked for low tech and high tech with community-based coalitions, national organizations, and local neighborhood-based groups. She's a graduate of the University of Missouri School of Journalism and started her career as a journalist. She was the director of communications at the ACLU of Missouri. So I'm excited to have two very smart, intelligent women who they're going to be able to answer some of our questions and engage in a very meaningful discussion. And so the first question is for Daniela. Daniela, many Puerto Ricans, especially those on the island, may think that it is just not as important what happens in U.S. politics. I've had conversation with friends and they're like, do we really need to know that? But given Puerto Rico's status as a colony, can you talk about how much power a U.S. president has over Puerto Rico?
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Marari. And it's great to be here. And Mayra, great to see you. We just had a bunch of adventures in Chicago at the DNC last week, or maybe the week before last. So yeah, I think these are really important questions. And I think one thing I do want to say before we get started, I think the connection with the diaspora is really important. In the sense that I think some of the things that we're going to talk about today and the things that are happening on the island, it's important for us to wake up as a people and connect. Because we're diaspora, we're so interconnected with both the well-being and the welfare of the island, but also we have some work to do on our journey of understanding ourselves, and I think our community does too, and that's why we're here. So just want to say all that. I think as far as the president goes, I mean, I think that there's the hard power, right? Then there's the influence power, and obviously the president has both. The president has the ability to can influence key federal appointments, such as the FEMA administrator, the head of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, and obviously, when we get to the conversation about how those resources are allocated, the president has a tremendous amount of influence and power in that way. Another thing related is that the president has the power to appoint who's on the fiscal oversight board, right? I guess is La Junta, of us describe it. So the president has that tremendous power. I would say also, even stepping back from the appointment power, it's also the power of influence, right? I mean, the president just in his or her discussion has the ability to elevate the conversation about Puerto Rico, has the ability to talk about what's happening, has the ability to shine a light on things that are happening and that are not happening. And I think to some degree, we haven't really seen a president really shine that light in a positive way. Obviously, we've seen Donald Trump shine it in a negative way, right? But we haven't, I think there's an opportunity there for our executive branch to really look into what's happening and be able to explain it to both the Diasporicans on the mainland, but also the rest of the US.
Yeah, like as I hear you talk, I keep thinking about Promesa, which was signed by, President Obama. So that's, part of the power that they have. And also, like, whatever a president say or do, like, it has an influence on people in terms of how they feel about themselves. And even if you don't support Donald Trump, he was the president at the time when he visited Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. So his words were demoralizing. So it's kind of like, if you are in that position, you have kind of like that power too. It's kind of like a very emotional perspective. So it's interesting that sometimes I speak with people and in Puerto Rico in particular, and they don't think it's important to know, about what's happening in US politics, because I think it's part of the colonial experience of like that disconnection that there is. So that's what I thought that question was important. But then moving towards the next question with Mayra, now that we're talking about Hurricane Maria and the Trump administration actions back then, so what do you think we learn about Trump and about Puerto Rico's relationship with the United States based on that particular situation?
Well, thank you again, Merari, for this opportunity, and more than honored to share this Zoom with two powerhouses women, Daniela and you.
Thank you.
This month we're gonna be remember this with great sadness, the anniversary of Hurricane Maria, and what we learned about Trump. Well, that in addition that he's a convicted felon, he's a compulsive liar, has complete disdain of the truth, unable to accept his responsibility as a leader, always blaming others or the other party for conspiring against him, and his racism toward Latinos and other minorities. For Trump, Puerto Rico is a red number in the gains and losses spreadsheet in his accounting books. We are damaged goods. He's not interested in us. And let's remember that in one point he wants to exchange us with Greenland. because he said, and in his words, that Puerto Rico was dirty and the people were poor. During his term, he did specific instructions to withhold $20 billion allocated to Puerto Rico for the Congress, and that assistance that never came caused the deaths of 4,600 residents in Puerto Rico from September to December in 2017. And it's not, it's a fact established by studies from the University of Harvard and George Washington, and also the Inspector General confirmed that Trump blocked funds to Puerto Rico. So, Trump belittles Puerto Rico in the same way that he despises other minorities and other ethnic groups that he considers inferior, that he intends to erase from the political and social spectrum in the United States. If he got elected, God forbid, we have in Project 2025. That with all the influence that we could have, that we'll have in Puerto Rico through Jennifer Gonzalez, that is a MAGA Republican running for governor, is going to be really detrimental for Puerto Rico. So we are not in Trump's agenda. We never been, and we never has been. So even Republicans in the recent platform, they didn't include no mention of Puerto Rico in the platform. They just only said that regarding territories, that we would protect Americans in the territories. So in terms of our relationship with the United States, besides Donald Trump, I think that we could have an openness for the Congress if we see that the Democrats could stay controlling the Senate and flip the House. And I think they could be seriously evaluating all this process of self-determination for Puerto Rico, not through the Puerto Rican Status Act, because the language is not clear and is polarizing. But I think that the committees in the House and the Senate will consider, address seriously the status, and also they already has been mentioned about the elimination of the board. Daniela talked about the influence of the president. Let me see, I think people is not listening to me. Kamala Harris, that he's the nominee for president for the Democrats, he's always mentioned in her speeches about Palestine, about the self-determination process. So let's start more close. Let's start here, that we have in Puerto Rico here for 126 years. And we could start talking about self-determination. So I think that as I said, taking out of the picture Donald Trump, that if the Democrats wins the presidency and hopefully the House and the Senate, I think it's going to be a good opportunity for us to bring the subject and address the issues. And even if Trump, God forbid, got elected, then we have to probably work harder because, we never know what in his unhinged mind we have, but that he could do anything weird. But we have to work harder.
Daniela, you want to say something?
I do actually, and I want to plus one or echo all the things that Mayra was saying, and I do think, just because we're talking about and we are the diaspora, I think we also, why these decisions are made in Congress, there are local officials like me, and there are other Diasporican officials who may, represent the diaspora in their local government, that I think that we also, when we talk about trying to get the Democrats on board beyond, if we're looking at a Kamala Harris Walz presidency, or even just in these conversations, because like Mayra said, neither party really got it right. I think we also have an opportunity. I mean, Mayra is doing such great work in South Carolina as a leader of her party, but it takes, I think, all of us to rise up and to wake up and say, no, you got it wrong. And like, and you don't know that because we're not at the table. So you don't know what you don't know. And we're telling you this isn't correct, and let's go back and fix it. And I think that as the diaspora, because our voice isn't fully represented in what we're hearing from maybe, let's say, the resident commissioner right now, that we also have an opportunity. And I do feel like I feel like I have an obligation. I don't want to speak for my colleague in South Carolina, but I think we do. That we must, when we see things that aren't right because people don't know our communities, because we're not in those places of power, and we have that power, we have to jump in. So
Yeah.
I think that's also how we can contribute.
And do you know, like going back to the question that I asked Mayra, I think it's related to what Daniela is trying to convey about like not both parties haven't had it right. It's like after Hurricane Maria, one of the things that came up for me was that the way that Puerto Rico's relationship is with the US came to be, it became more apparent or more evident, and in the eyes of a lot of people. And I think it woke up a lot of people in terms of like a lot of things, even the things that come into the island after a hurricane are controlled by the US. And because of that, a lot of people died. A lot of people didn't get the help that they needed. And also the whole thing about, exchanging Puerto Rico for Greenland, like some people got really surprised, even Democrats, about that statement. And they were like, how the hell would you say something like that? That's racist, which it is racist. But I felt, that's the relationship we have with the US. You didn't know it? That's interesting that you didn't know that.
And
So,
I would like to add, Merari, that that after Hurricane Maria, we having a new generation of Diasporicans here. Like not the Diasporican that historically came to United States in the 60s, on the 70s. We were, other people, more educated, more connected to social media, more connected to the information. And we became like climate refugees, even though that we are Americans here. Because how many people, I could say in South Carolina, a lot of people moved because of Hurricane Maria. And probably it's the same thing in other states. But we came with another thinking of who we are as Puerto Ricans, and what we need to be more involved in situations, because it's another generation different that's moving here right now. It's like that we having two different Diasporicans at the same time.
Thank you for that point. I think that's important because it brings different perspective to the work that we do as Puerto Ricans in the diaspora. But Daniela, I wanted to ask you, since we're talking about Trump, what do you see as some of Trump's most harmful policies and proposals that will harm Puerto Ricans in the US?
I have a list. I'm gonna try and go through my list here. And please, Mayra or Marari, if I miss some, let me know. I think, there's a lot. One was going after the ACA, the Affordable Health Care Act. Certainly, we know that a lot of people on the island depend on access to the ACA. Particularly because the island has a higher amount of children and seniors, right? So even talking about getting rid of it, certainly the efforts to, curtail Medicaid expansion, which also would disproportionately hurt the island. So hot in here, I think I'm actually just going to take off this jacket we've got. I think one of the things that struck me most, his, and I think this was unintentional, and then I was, was the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Sorry, I'm choking here. And why that wasn't a necessarily kind of throw a paper towel at the island sort of thing, and had a huge unintended consequence. Well, maybe I shouldn't say, I'm sure the designers, it was intended to hurt us. But the idea that it classified Puerto Rican businesses as foreign, so they had to pay additional taxes. So that's called the global intangible low tax income tax, but it was part of that sweeping tax cut from Trump in 2017. But I think what we're hearing and seeing, and I'm going to go through my list, is not just the unintended consequences, but the consequences of when leaders aren't intentional about the effect on the island, right? And it goes back to, being, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? And I don't know who. I'm going to guess that there weren't very many of our people at the table when these tax cuts were designed, but to classify businesses as a foreign entity in the context of, post Maria, post all these other economic, or post all these other things that are harming the island economically, and then adding something else, right? This isn't the Jones Act, it's adding something else. So I would say the Tax Cuts and Job Act, going after the ACA, trying to cut programs like SNAP, and we know that the island already has a let me back up. The assistance to is already lesser on the island because they distribute it through the block grant program, which is it's a different way of distributing those funds, and really it's not enough. So that would be another harmful policy. And then I would just say broadly immigration policies. I mean, his really anti-immigration policy, but also anti-everyone policy, and particularly being hostile towards Latinos, why we are, I would say we're immigrant adjacent. That's my term. I don't know if anybody else is saying that. We have an immigrant experience. Obviously, we are citizens. Obviously, we live in this colonial contradiction of this relationship with the US. But certainly the anti-Latino hate affects us too, because I live in a place like Missouri where they don't know really what Puerto Ricans are. So they're just like, you have a Spanish sounding last name, you're them, whoever them is, and they're not even going to go into the nuances. So I'd say that those were the most harmful policies that I've looked at. But I think that there are two things I think to take away from it. One is back to the question of, how do we become part of either the decision makers or be factored in these decisions, right? So these unintended consequences don't hurt our community more. And two, I mean, it's back to what Mayra was saying. I think you're seeing the other response is this, I don't want to say uprising, but I want to say like this awakening of the diaspora and this new diaspora. I don't know if it's it's the next generation here. They're the third wave, right? Like Cubans have multiple waves. Like maybe this is like the third wave for Puerto Rican migrants or immigration, but also it's creating this different, I think, desire and different realization that we have to advocate. And I'll just share a little bit of how one of the places Mayra and I connected was in DC during a Boricua Advocacy Week. And we're, contrary to what Trump's policies are, we're trying to make policies and inform Congress that they need to have. One of the things that they've been asking for is a food sovereignty program in the Farm Bill, and addressing, maybe moving, it's NAP in Puerto Rico, instead of SNAP, but maybe moving the NAP program into a different structure so it's not dependent on block grants to end Act 22. But the shift, I think the realities that we saw under Trump and the crisis on the island and the newer wave of migration, I think is also should be propelling the diaspora, and some of us are doing it in advocating Congress to create some changes that aren't the big status question changes, but are some of the changes that that we also need to address, but the issues that are kind of at a crisis point, right? So like SNAP, Act 22. I mean, I don't love that you said climate refugees, Mayra, but I think that that's accurate, right? I mean, we can be talking about what's happening on the island in a way so that people can see, not only see themselves reflected in the diaspora, but see ourselves in the context of the political climate that we come from, right?
You know, like as you talk about immigration and the impact that has in the Puerto Rican community here, it makes sense to think that the more racist the rhetoric of Donald Trump and anti-immigrant rhetoric, you know, or propaganda towards immigrants, the stronger the prejudice and the bias and the discrimination will be towards Puerto Rican. And I'm saying that because there is a sector in the Puerto Rican community and in Puerto Rico who they differentiate themselves from the immigrant community because, well, we are US citizens, and there's this idea that we are better in some ways. There's some racism in there and American exceptionalism that we have bought into. So, but we don't understand sometimes, some of us don't understand that some of these people don't differentiate us from other Latinx groups. So they're not going to ask you if you're a citizen or not, if you're Puerto Rican or not. For them, you have the same label and they're going to treat you in that way. So I think it was good that you brought up that point. And in that way, we should become in solidarity with the immigrant community. But so thank you for saying that, Daniela. But Mayra, so we've been talking about Trump, and I know that a lot of people came in here to talk about or to hear about Trump. So we know he's bad, but Democrats have also failed Puerto Ricans. During the time Democrats have been in control, they barely deliver on the promise of, number one, getting rid of PROMESA and the Fiscal Control Board. If the people who are listening, if you don't know what PROMESA is, it's a law that came into law or it was signed by President Obama with the apparent idea of fixing the fiscal situation of Puerto Rico. But that law brought the Fiscal Control Board, which are around five people who are making financial decisions over Puerto Rico, and it's brought Puerto Rico even into a more difficult situation financially, closing schools and many other basic services. So they fail on getting rid of PROMESA and the Fiscal Control Board, not doing anything meaningful to solve the issue of status, which is a very important issue, and also using the issue of status to advocate for statehood, because it will provide 2 Democratic seats in Congress without thinking about the detrimental consequences statehood could have for Puerto Rico. And some people listening to this might be surprised about some Puerto Ricans not supporting statehood, but I think we need to be critical about this and educate ourselves a little bit more about the other status options that half of the population support. So at the time to go to vote, Puerto Ricans are told, you know, here in the United States, that independently of all these concerns that you might have as a Puerto Rican, you go to vote for Democrats, even after not delivering on what was promised, so Trump doesn't win. What do you think needs to change in how the Democratic Party approaches Puerto Rico and Puerto Rico's status? And Daniela, I know that you want to say something about this too.
Yeah.
But Mayra, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. Well, I'm elected official for the Democratic Party in South Carolina. So first of all, I have to recognize that our party as a party, national, failed Puerto Ricans on the islands and here in a lot of the issues. And I totally agree that the party remembers Puerto Rico at the time of elections, and even our issues, the ones that are important to us, are not even in the party agenda. I also want to first emphasize that the imposition of PROMESA show two things. One, expose the existing colonial relationship that Puerto Rico have with the United States for those that still do not recognize that we are a colony, and that and how after 8 years, I think, how ineffective and has that law has caused to the economic, social, and political life in Puerto Rico. We having a non-elected government taking control of all our institutions, our resources, and the administration of the island. And we have no decision of that, even though that we celebrate elections, but there's others that decided for us. So, and while some Democrats in the Congress call for the end of La Junta, of the board, the Fiscal Control Board, the executive is the one that, as Daniela mentioned before, are the one that made the appointments to the board. And and all the appointments coming from people from Wall Street that really are against the island interest. I think that the Democratic Party still doesn't know who we are, what is Puerto Rico, who we are, our culture, our history, our political structure, the way that the political parties are created. That I could mention as a simple example. I have member officers from my party in South Carolina that they were unaware that we having 7 million Puerto Ricans living here, that 5.5 million of our Puerto Rican here vote in federal elections. That there's a large percentage of Puerto Ricans here living in the United States that are looking for a fair and honest self-determination process that not necessarily is statehood. And sometimes, the parties going to Puerto Rico seeking the support of the people on the island, and the people in the island doesn't vote in federal elections. Just only for the commissioner, resident commissioner. So for me, how we could, I think it's a process of education that we need to educate the Democratic Party about who we are, and starting with meetings with more than the elected officials. I think we need to talk with the DNC leadership. I think we need to talk with campaigns. I think it's important to even occupy positions as state parties, like I did. Electing Puerto Ricans to local positions who honestly desire to make changes, positive changes for Puerto Rico. We need to educate from the bottom to the top. It's important also, as I think, that we need to change the leadership in Puerto Rico too. Has to be a simultaneous and parallel process. We need to show that Puerto Rico have other political options in terms of status. We need a different leadership in Puerto Rico that could start sending a clear and more educated message. And also it's important for us to start building relationship and compromise with elected officials that are non-Boricuas. They need to include in their vocabulary, in their discourse every day, that there are other options such as independence, such as a free association. I could mention, Congressman Roucana, that he recently did a speech in the floor, and he mentioned that colonialism was run in India during his grandfather's lifetime. So, and he said he's running Puerto Rico in 2024. So we need to start doing that, that the people, that elected officials that are not Boricuas start to use that language, that use the correct words. And I know that this path is not gonna be easy. requires a lot of work, requires a lot of compromise, and also requires from us as a Diasporicans to organize and working together. We're having several organizations, but even though that probably we could have different ways to address issues, I think that we could have common ground, at least in talking about self-determination and other issues. You know, I remember a phrase of Cesar Chavez, the Mexican Union leader, that's saying that, you know, in order to achieve a dream, you have first to have the ability to dream, but also you have to be persistent. So we need to be persistent and keep talking about
Yes.
the topic. So and I also believe that 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 the federal parties that we have in here in the United States haven't seen yet the power that we have as an electoral force in the United States. And sometimes I think that even us haven't seen yet the power that we have as an electoral force.
Thank you, Mayra. Daniela, do you want to add something?
Sure, although I think Mayra really summed it up well. I think just one, all politics is local, right? And at the end of the, I mean, I think it is what she's saying is this grassroots to grass tops, or however you want to say it, top to bottom piece of, you know, educating both local elected officials, but also educating our community, right? Because that's part of, I think, the nature of colonization is we don't always know who we are as a people or where we came from or what it all means and what's happened and then what's happening on the island. And so I think that we have to, you know, to educate the party, you know, the people, the party leaders and the local electeds, you know, essentially make up, you know, the bulk of the party, right? So if there's a push from there, then the top can start to listen. Doesn't mean the top shouldn't be listening, but we all know that sometimes it takes a groundswell of a movement to get people to move. And then, you know, I think it is that educational piece. We're learning, we have to teach people, and we have to also teach not only our diaspora, I think, as Mayra said, our allies. I mean, Representative Khanna had a great speech. He's been a supporter of our community. You know, I come from Missouri and I am in Missouri's 1st congressional district, and Cori Bush is my representative, and she did a floor speech. We are not a huge population in Missouri, but I am so proud that she chose to do that and represented our people. And there's a lot more between Khanna and Bush that could be doing that, right? And you know, when we did a resolution in our Board of Aldermen after Representative Bush did her floor speech, and it passed. It wasn't quite in bank, but I think we had like 13 out of 15. And so my colleagues were like, I didn't know that. I didn't understand that. I didn't know what that meant. And so it's educational for them. And man, I have my Puerto Rican flag on my desk in the chambers, and I'm sure by the time I'm through, everybody in the city will know I'm Puerto Rican. But I think that that's important, right? Because I mean, we're not part of it to get movement. I think Mayra is exactly right. We have to have more than the diaspora. And and I know I'm jumping around a little bit here, but if we're ever going to resolve the status question, it's going to take more than Puerto Ricans, like full stop, right? Like it is. And it's got to be more than the diaspora, more than the island to get people to listen. So, and then my last point, because I promised myself I would not leave this podcast. They do know, I mean, they do know that we're here when it's convenient for them. And I will say that as an example in Pennsylvania this past week, when Trump trotted out his reggaeton people, right?
All right. Yeah.
You know, and so
Anuel.
and you know, I mean, they knew we mattered in the moment, right? To coordinate that. Now, also, I know this isn't about status, but just in the contradictory nature of these conversations, I found it very interesting that Anuel said, well, he's going to make our country, Puerto Rico, great again. I'm like, he said, I mean, maybe that was the translation, but they both said, him and Justin Quiles, they both said country, and I was like, not really.
That's interesting, right?
What this all means. But yeah,
Mhm.
I whoever, Crystal, I agree with you. I know, but my point is that they know that Pennsylvania is, they're Puerto Ricans.
Battleground. Yeah.
They know it's a battleground. They know that there are Puerto Ricans there, and and so when it does matter, they know that we're there, right? So it's getting the party, the Democratic Party, obviously, but the people in power to know that we are there more than when it's convenient for them.
And so, like, yes, I'm glad that you brought up that point, which I thought we needed to mention that because this happened just last week. Anuel is a reggaeton musician in Puerto Rico, and he supported Donald Trump last year. He endorsed him. What's interesting was that Donald Trump said he didn't know who the hell that he was right before he was about to take the stage to endorse him, and he endorsed him anyway. So that's the part that's very infuriating. But the other thing that Mayra said that I think is very important is that there needs to be a parallel process between the Puerto Ricans in the US and the Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico. And I think for those of you who are listening who don't know, there's going to be an election now in 2024, November 5th, where there's a historic increase of interest for what's called La Alianza, or the alliance between two political movements who support different. They are not aligning on the status issue, but they are very. They agree on the basic values and in a process of self-determination, and which is very different from what the pro-statehood party wants. And so, I think that we need to have that happening in the island as well, in order to send a different message. So the next question is for Daniela, which is like, even if Trump loses, his views and policies are going to continue to be a major part of American politics. Do you think that that's something Puerto Ricans should consider as we think about what kind of relationship we want to have with the United States?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a good question. I also love to hear what Mayra has to say about this too. I mean, I think it's clear. I mean, I know this conversation's about Trump, and we can't lose sight of the fact that nobody's gotten it right in our two-party system. And so I think that, I live in Missouri. I actually just got done testifying yesterday at literally this is called we have a special committee on illegal immigrant crimes that our state legislature started. And they didn't think anything was wrong with the name. And they're like, why are people reacting to us like this? And I say that because in my mind, in my experience, being in a red state and being in a place where people have not taken the time to know the nuanced differences between, who Latinos are. I believe, and I've experienced, I think any anti-immigrant sentiment, whether we are technically immigrants or not, is going to affect Puerto Ricans, because if they're hostile to Latinos, they're going to be hostile to us. And I think this election, we've had some of the biggest uptick in anti-immigrant sentiment in the past 15 years, right? Yeah. And I know whether we say immigrant with an asterisk or immigrant, adjacent, that kind of language, rhetoric, hate affects our community. And I will say, back to somebody's point in the chat about, or maybe on like, I do think that also, and this is going to be a larger philosophical thing, but, we haven't talked about, and I do believe that we have the internal colonization, right? Or the colonization of the mind, right? Where I think, maybe that's what you see in some of these like very pro-Trump Latinos that don't really understand that they're internalizing all the hate. And it comes out as being, this thing that they're for, when really everybody in the room is against them and they haven't noticed.
Yeah.
So I think that is one of the enduring legacies of Trump that I think that we need to consider. I also think that, to Mayra's point in the conversation of self-determination, I know that the contradiction is that we can't self-determine without the recognition of Congress, but I think that we have to figure out how to organize ourselves and our allies into making that happen, because no party, Democrats or Republicans, aren't going to do it for us. Right? We have to be the ones pushing the agenda. We have to be building that recognition. We have to be educating our communities, but also other communities that, both, I mean, we're literally fodder. Like, I read something where McConnell's, saying to Republicans, the worst thing, Democrats are gonna, they're gonna make DC and Puerto Rico a state. And then like, Democrats are like, we're gonna make you a state. And then the Republicans are like, we're not gonna talk about you. And then Democrats are like, we're gonna talk about you, but maybe that wasn't the right way, right? So nobody's gonna get it right. So we have to, I think, not depend on ourselves in the austere kind of way, but really advocate for ourselves.
Thank you, Daniela. We need to speed up a little bit because we're running out of time. But I wanted to ask Mayra, Boricuas Unidos is criticized for meeting with all the parties and politicians, which is the word that Daniela is talking about, educating the public parties and the politicians to talk about. So Boricuas Unidos is criticized for meeting with politicians to talk about independence for Puerto Rico and a fair and just decolonization process because they see it as working with the empire. So based on your experience within the Democratic Party, how much space is there to talk about independence or even free association for Puerto Rico?
The thing is that we have a lot of space. I'm always see the glass half full and not half empty. The two traditional parties in Puerto Rico have for years inserting the discussion of status into the Democratic Party. And unfortunately, in the recent years, the pro-statehood people have dominated the discussion. So we have seen that that the Congress has introduced some bills about self-determination that has opened the door to the discussion and also other viable options for Puerto Rico. As I saying before, it's an education process for the Democratic Party. And we need to insert ourselves even in the party structures at the state, at national level, to begin to broaden the discussion. So I think that's like a big opportunity for us. As Daniela mentioned recently, that's something that we always say in South Carolina. If we don't have a seat in the table, then we are part of the menu. So it's time to be part of having the seat and not being part of the menu. And inserting in those structures, that doesn't mean that's going to change my values and my principles or what I aspire for Puerto Rico and for the islands. But and I am not working with the empire. I'm just creating the conditions and the urgency and the obligation to start a fair and just decolonization process. We need to work on that, and we have to keep focused on the objective that we were looking for. And so if both PR has been criticized, I think has been unfair, or probably people doesn't understand that the main goal that we are looking for is gonna take some time. I remember when I was co-founder of the Movimiento Unión Soberanista in Puerto Rico, the MUS, that we have in a diverse group from people from looking for independence, other for free association. A phrase that David Noriega, our lovely David Noriega said, that he said, well, we're gonna be we're going in the same bus together. Probably some people could stop on the free association, but I'm looking for the final stop, that is the independence. But we still having in the same bus looking for the same goals, that is to define the situation, the status situation for Rico. So I think that we have to use, that's the space that we have, a lot of space. Even the Democratic Party, we need to take charge and be inserting in all this structure in a way to educate and start to changing the subject and starting to changing the minds of the people.
Thank you, Mayra. So moving to the next question, Daniela. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, after the 2016 election in which Trump won the presidency, social justice organizations documented an escalation of social racist acts and behaviors against ethnic minorities. His rhetoric encouraged hate, hostility, and fear of minorities and all of those who are different. The racial profiling, hostility, and even racially motivated murders impacted the Puerto Rican people. We saw videos of Puerto Ricans being attacked to this date or presumed to be a thief or attacking public spaces for speaking in Spanish. And this is important to say because I think the Puerto Rican people in the island need to know about these things are happening. So how can the diaspora living in the US promote a sense of safety and protect our communities if Trump were to win the 2024 election?
Yeah, I mean, I want to echo some of the things that, I mean, I think the anti-immigrant, anti-hate rhetoric obviously is a contributor. And I know like in Missouri, hate crimes have gone up something like, I'd have to look 50%, but something significant. So I think we have to kind of look back on what we were doing in 2016, and it would be more than that. But I think to echo, I think Kelvin in the chat who said that we need to have to educate and get educated. I think that's part of it, right? Part of it is education about our community, about what's happening, about knowing your rights, certainly knowing the laws. And I think building, and also in the chat, Amanda saying that we need to, have allyship or alliances with other communities who are talking about self-determination, but other communities that might also be in those at-risk groups, right? Like we have to come together. And I think from, the advocacy perspective, as a former ACLU person, I mean, those organizations like the Southern Poverty Center, organizations like the ACLU, I mean, I hope we don't get to this point, but I mean, being prepared for a legal battle or, I call advocacy the battle, the court of public opinion, right? But being prepared to fight, both, on the streets and with our feet and also, in the courtrooms.
Mm-hmm. And as you say that, I'm thinking about the people during the Trump presidency who stood up and challenged him directly and spoke up, and they took the backlash of what that took, or what that took in terms of like their name being dragged to the mud. And so, having people who speak up for us, as you're doing right now, and to talk about, our communities and to stand up for ourselves and to fight the battle. Because it's going to be a very difficult battle for all of Puerto Ricans here in the diaspora. So the next question that I wanted to ask has to do with it's directed at both of you, that you are both Puerto Rican political leaders in the diaspora that are trying to fight for both your home communities in San Luis and South Carolina, but also for Puerto Rico. What advice do you have for other Diasporicans, Puerto Ricans, who want to do the same as voters and as leaders?
Let me start. I think we don't have to be afraid. We have to always state it that we are Puerto Ricans, that we speak Spanish, that we are bilingual, and we have a voice that has to be heard. And be involved in, if you don't want to be involved directly in politics, you could be involved in organizations in the community, and be involved and in the way to spread the word. And we having, Ireland, we having a lot of Diasporican organizations around the nation that we could volunteer, that we could, even educate ourselves so we could educate others. I've been in as an officer of the South Carolina Democratic Party for the last 2 years, and they got accustomed now that every time I speak, I always say buenos días, buenas noches, buenas tardes. So they had to answer back to me because they know that even though I am an American, I'm different. I have another language. I have another culture. I always bring something about Puerto Rico at every meeting because they need to know who we are. I'm doing that through that position, but I also doing that with other organizations, you know, immigration organizations and Habitat. You know, there's a lot of social and nonprofit organizations that you could also get inserted in a way to help our community, but also to spread the message. So you don't have to be afraid. We are pitires. We could fight with the biggest águila or falcon that we could show us. So we are pitires. We are moribibis. So we could lay down one day, but the next day we stand up again. And so we are like the roble, that we are stronger and our roots are really strong on the earth. So we could stand for anything. So that's what we had to do.
Thank you, Mayra. Thank you very much for those kind words. Daniela, do you want to add something?
Yeah, that was beautiful. It's hard to follow. I mean, I think what I do want to echo is to the other side of is to feel the fear and do it anyway. And I would say that just from my experience, you know, I've been in office for about 16 months, so I'm relatively new. And one of my hesitancies in deciding to run was I didn't know if I'd be able to do anything for Puerto Ricans or the diaspora or how it would work. And then the diaspora kind of found me. I mean, it did find me, it's embraced me. And so I would say that if you do have that fear, to do it anyway. And also one of the beautiful sort of inexplicable things about the diaspora is that we want to support and love each other. And you know, Mayra's out there in South Carolina. I've seen her, I think, three times this year. Merari, I saw you in Chicago. I know a bunch of people from all over here that I've been able to engage with on these issues that I didn't, had I not spoken up or had I not said something, and I was scared. I mean, I was scared to do a resolution about Act 22. I was nervous about asking my congresswoman to do that. I didn't know how my community would receive it. And it's really been both I've been able to educate people, and I've been able to create some of those alliances. I mean, and so it's been beautiful. And I'll even say I've got a friend from high school on this call, Patrilli. Hey, my sister's on this call. Hey,
nice.
And those things these moments would have never happened had I not just did it. I didn't know what I was going to, and I didn't know what was going to happen in return. So I will say that despite the fear, the Diasporicans want to meet each other and help each other. And I don't know if it's in our blood, our culture, or it's part of the roble that makes up, you know, who we are, you know, but it's there. So I would say, do it. There are tons of organizations. If you've got a question, I'm on social, you can find me. And people are also happy to talk about it and eat. So
I wanted to close with this cozy feeling, but there are two questions. And so I'm going to direct one of the questions to each of you. But we only have like 5 minutes. So could you do it in 5 minutes? So the first question is for Mayra. So is there a way to change the structure of promesa so that it is more transparent and reflective of the Puerto Rican voice?
Well, I think that is not to change promesa. I think that we have to eliminate promesa. You know, promesa is not part of Puerto Rico. I think that during Obama administration, they created that notion that we don't know how to handle ourselves, and then that we need somebody to handle us. And even though that the federal system allow states to file for bankruptcy in one chapter, they didn't allow Puerto Rico to do that. So they put the most hardened process to us. I think we have to take this out, and then we reorganize as our system in Puerto Rico. We don't need somebody else that that doesn't know us, that doesn't know what we need to tell us what to do. And and if we live in a democracy, we elect our officials and we have them accountable. That's the elections are for. So I don't think that we need to improve PROMESA. I think we have to take it out of the system, of the process, and we are governed as we always been doing in Puerto Rico.
Okay, thank you, Mayra. So the next question is for Daniela. If we do have a scenario in which Trump wins and his policies start harming Puerto Ricans, how should we organize and respond beyond just trying to elect Democrats next time? Because that may seem insufficient and even insulting to some Puerto Ricans.
So that's a great question. So the question is, how do we organize if Trump becomes Trump gets
Elected beyond electing Democrats?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have to organize, I think we have to organize the island, the diaspora, and our allies. I mean, I really, I mean, I know I said it before, I feel pretty strongly about this. I don't think we get any resolution to the status question without, without non-Puerto Ricans. I mean, I know
Mhm.
it's just the numbers, and I think, and part of it is, really, I mean, it's hard education, but when Maria happened, I think it was something like 50% of Americans or US, United States people on the mainland didn't know that Puerto Rico was a part of the US, right? And so, you know, the hard part about education is that the situation is complex and it's different from the US, and that makes people that makes people tune out. But I think you have to call the conditions of the island, right? I mean, the real crises that are happening, the financial crises, the climate crises, the essentially the second class citizenship, things that are happening, that they can't get, you know, if there's a climate disaster, people can't get food because it gets sent back because of the Jones Act. I mean, those are like the real, the tangible things that are wrong. I mean, I know there's a
Mhm.
lot that's wrong, but I think that that's, I mean, if there is a crisis, you point to the crises and you get people on board beyond the diaspora.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that response. I think to summarize, I think there are certain policies that politicians need to get educated on in terms of how they harm Puerto Rico in the first place, like the Jones Act, the Law 22, which is more local, but like it's not federal law. How to move to more food sovereignty in terms of instead of just getting like food stamps, for example, to move away from this paternalistic view to how we can produce and self-govern ourselves, to be more like develop policies that are more self-empowering instead of like paternalistic. And so with that, also like the promesa, which is not, it's just something that comes from the top down, and it just like, it's not helping the Puerto Rican economy, and it's just making a lot of Puerto Ricans migrate to the United States. So I think we've made the point today in this podcast. So, but I want to thank you for being here, and also for like taking on a different voice or perspective in terms of Puerto Rico's status. It's not only about statehood. We have to talk about self-determination in terms of independence and free association. And so thank you for everyone who has been, who attended this webinar and to listen to this Diaspórica podcast live recording. And thank you to Boricuas Unidos for inviting Diaspórica. Alberto?
Yes, thank you, Merari, for hosting this and some of our other conversations. And I get to plug us now before I let everybody go. We're going to, in some ways, continue this conversation about Trump, about the election, about US politics, but talk away much way more about Puerto Rican politics. Next week at this time at 6 p.m., Merari and I will be in conversation about, the candidates running for governor in Puerto Rico, especially Jennifer Gonzalez, the pro-statehood candidate who is a Trump supporter and who, for some reason, which we will get into, likes all of these things that Mayra and Daniela were warning us against for the for the past hour. So tune in. So how is that possible? We're going to talk about it. Tune into that conversation. But thanks again to Mayra and to Daniela, to fantastic Puerto Rican political leaders here in the United States. The questions they answered are hard because this is a hard issue. The work they are trying to do, just nudging Puerto Rico, into a little corner of the conscience and consciousness of people who usually do not think about us at all, is incredibly hard work. So, I personally appreciate it. I know all of us appreciate it who are trying to fight for a fair and just future for Puerto Rico. And thanks to all of you for joining us. We're going to continue our events, as I say, next week, and might even have some other announcements coming up. So stay tuned. Thanks again, and keep fighting for and talking about Puerto Rico.
Gracias. Thank you so much for the invite. Good
You're
to see you
welcome.
guys.
See you all.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
And can I just say real quick before we head out, we couldn't
Yeah.
do this. I mean, we're all in it together, right? So a shout out to Boricuas Unidos, a shout out to Merari and I'm going to say it wrong, the podcast,
Diaspórica. Diaspórica.
Diaspórica, because you're the vehicle. So thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're welcome.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.